Hey, peace, family. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. I am We Charge Colonialism. Hold on, we on pause?
Natasha,
you
Go ahead,
paused.
Natasha.
You were paused. You were paused for a second.
Oh yeah, I might be having some. I might have some internet issues again, but let's go.
Good morning, everyone. Peace. My name is Natasha, and I am a member of the Northeast Political Prisons Coalition. I'm also a community organizer and a current student as well.
peace everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series. I think we have an internet problem here.
Yeah, he is. So, I guess we can start. One of us can start with one of our stories for today, and then when Brother Kimba is back in action, he can go on with his.
Yeah, you know the thing, we all frozen though. Like the screen, I can't see you moving. I can't move. Brian Kim, I can't move. Like
Really?
just stuck.
Oh, because I can see you, Frank, and I can see you move and hear you fine and everything.
Oh wow. Okay.
For me, like
no.
good except for Brother Kimba's video. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know how everyone. Okay, yeah. So it says no one is frozen but Kimba. So we're good, Frank.
We good?
Yeah.
All right, because I can't move, so I'm seeing myself stuck. All right, so but is Brad Kimba on to lead or can he lead?
Can he lead the story?
I mean, no, like moderate take his detail. I don't know.
Well, we should go ahead and start, and then when he is able to start, then it can go.
All right. Okay, so that's good. All right, so I guess I can go ahead first. All right, folks. So as usual, so we're going to leave until Brother Kimba can come. So what we do as usual, we go ahead and give summary of what is going on around the world or story that we have to give. So I guess I'm going to present mine. So what I have here is Zimbabwe. And let me see if I can share my story. Zimbabwe, you see, my internet is messing up. It's not even doing it.
Let me see if I can find your link. If I can, then maybe I can share it on my end.
All right, I think I just come back. So yeah, I don't know what was going on, man. Okay, so let me see if I can share what I have here. So it's Zimbabwe, and I guess Uganda came out with a space satellite. But I have a few questions. I mean, something concerning. All right, so this is it. I got a few things here to talk about. So they said Uganda and Zimbabwe launched first satellite. So I have a little concern here. So as to where it was launched, because when I first saw this story, I thought it was launched in Africa, but I think it was launched in the United States here in Virginia. So how can an African satellite be launched in another country where you have, your space station is in another country? I don't know how can that be, but it's a rocket carrying the tiny satellite double Pierre Africa Start, one for Uganda and Zamsat one for Zimbabwe, successfully launched from Virginia in the United States alongside Uganda first satellite as part of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. So that's one area I'm still confused. I don't know if they are saying the space station of these two countries is in Virginia, the United States, alongside with Japan, or they all collaborated. So I don't know. So that was where I was a little bit confused. And then my computer is frozen. So there's one area here too, but I feel that is a weak argument that they try to give. Hopefully, let me see it. All right, so sorry, folks. I don't know. I can't see it again for some reason. Um, but there's a weak argument it gave in reference to as to why the satellite was launched. Um, in regarding where they said the country is poor, people are hungry. Why should you launch it? Um, I don't know. I can't even get it again. All right, let me see. Zimbabwe economy has been struggling for 2 decades, forcing many citizens to immigrate in search of green pasture. Let me see. Um, okay, so here's what it said. It said launching a satellite when the economy is fragile is stupidity. Poverty has for the past 5 years increased. You cannot buy a car when your family is starving. So let me take this out here. So with that, I fear that it is a weak argument to say you cannot launch a satellite or a space satellite when your citizens are hungry, when you have a bad economy. So when I read it and I said, I don't think this is an innovation. And again, that is to say, if somebody is innovative of going into that field, why can another person be innovative of going into agriculture? So if, for example, I want to how to call it, study aerospace, to go to space. So how are you going to stop me just because the country is hungry, or just because the citizens in Africa are hungry? And I think that is why, because Africans focus on feeding themselves or on their stomach, that is why they're not being innovative. And I think that's one of the reasons in Africa people are not being innovative to really come out to take the challenge or to take the risks, because with feeder, you cannot go in certain fee when the economic situation of that country or of Africa is poor. You cannot go in certain fee when people are not feeding themselves, when people are not hungry, because everything we focus on is about how we can eat for the day and go and sleep and then wake up and struggle for the next day, and how to and struggle for the next day to find food to eat. So that was a weak argument, I think, that they portray in here, that the economy is poor or the people don't have food to eat, and things. And that is what I think, if we continue on our path, we are not being innovative, and we will always rely, because at the end of the day, if you're saying we cannot feed ourselves, then what is the reason why we cannot feed ourselves when we cannot produce our own food? And then we depend on outside nation to feed us. So I mean, I don't even know how to even classify. I think that's one reason Africa, we've been lacking. It is a weak argument. I don't think it is something that we need to engage in. All I can say is bravo to the team of Uganda and Zimbabwe. But my problem that I have, I don't think we should have such station with outside of Africa. We have that station in the United States or in Virginia. I don't think we should have it, because at the end of the day, the game, we will get stronger. It's just like what we see happening with, we keep mentioning his name, Kari Avi, Avin and so forth. Once you try to deviate from their ideology, they try to punish you. Oh, okay, then we cannot allow you to have your aerospace station in America or in Virginia or in our country if you don't comply to what we want to do. So I think if we're doing something of this kind, it should be on the African continent where we have total control. The issue here is, even if we are using European knowledge, or even if we are using outside knowledge, we should be in full control of it, because again, when the European or the colonizer are using African, they do not allow African to be in full control. They are in full control while they are using African to do their job. So if we are using them to do our job, we should be in full control of it.
Hey, peace. I hope I didn't knock. Did we lose Natasha? But Yeah, appreciate you bringing this story up. I know I was having some technical issues in the beginning, so I want to say, Habari Gani, Amani, peace to everybody that's joining us. Uhuru, which means freedom. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We charge colonialism if you have it, and make sure that you share this podcast and book club. In the second half, we're going to continue our reading of The Falsification of African Consciousness by Dr. Amerson Wilson. So, Mani to all of the Africans that are tuning in. We charge colonialism, and this part of the discussion is our weekly roundup. And Frank, again, thank you for bringing this particular story up, because these is the type of discussions that we need to be having as African people. This particular story in regards to Africans developing the technology to be able to explore space or to have these satellites, right? I can see the criticism in regards to prioritizing, but I think you brought up a good point in regards to when we talk about the issues that Zimbabwe is having. A lot of those issues, all of those issues, are a result of colonialism, the colonial relationships, and the remnants of colonialism in Zimbabwe. And then, decades even after the African people were able to reclaim their land, reclaim their country from the European colonizers, they still had to deal with sanctions and outside forces trying to marginalize Zimbabwe and keep them from thriving economically. And so this is the environment, the climate that Zimbabwe is attempting to develop in. This particular endeavor that Zimbabwe is on, again, I feel like that, yes, they, for one, they're taking the initiative to invest in in mathematics. These are things that we should be investing in as African people. So we're no longer dependent on European satellites or European innovations and so forth. So they're sort of like taking the lead in Africa, but I think that there has to be things done simultaneously, because the reality is that, there are Zimbabweans who are suffering economically. Zimbabwe as a country is suffering economically. And so what are we doing? What's the plan in tandem? Is this, some sort of symbolic thing? Like, what is the, end goal of developing these satellites, right? So, it's good to see the overall plan as well. Like, we're developing these satellites, but we're doing this in education too. We're doing this, and this is how Zimbabwe is going to thrive and be able to advance themselves into the future. And so, I mean, I don't know the whole Zimbabwe plan, but I can see how people will push back against this endeavor. But there's other nations doing it too, but we can't just be doing it for symbolic reasons, I guess. That's the point I want to make. I don't know if Natasha, if you wanted to add something to.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of questions around the launching of the satellite, and I think it's something that we have to think about in terms of, from multiple perspectives, that raise multiple questions in terms of, like you brought up, Brother Akimba, if the United States, right, if a country if a state in the United States is helping Zimbabwe, for example, to launch a satellite, but yet is unwilling to lift the sanctions that are against Zimbabwe, how do those two things coincide, and why? So, it brings up questions of, one, who's behind, is this the state of Zimbabwe? Does this have something to do that is connected with the government? Or is this more of a private interest, a private group that, has helped to launch this satellite? Because how are you able to, get into good enough relations where you're able to launch a satellite within a state on this land of what's called America, but yet America is not willing to lift the sanctions that are really, as Akimba pointed out, harming Zimbabwe? So I think that's one thing that we need to look at and think about critically. Why is that a thing? And why are the sanctions not being lifted? We should care more about having the sanctions lifted than, having a satellite brought out, because if we're thinking about the material reality of the people in Zimbabwe and how they are suffering under these sanctions and what these sanctions are doing to the country, it's really important that those sanctions are lifted so that Zimbabwe is able to move in a way that allows them to really help to provide for those people of the country, or give people, the citizens of that country, the ability to be able to successfully thrive in their everyday lives, and not have to deal with all of the things that come along with the sanctions that are also backed by other European powers. So I think that's one of the things that it brings up. I do like, to Kimba's point of, what is the purpose when we think about this idea of chasing the West, right? The West has put so many satellites into outer space, and now we're chasing after and creating more. And we already know that the things that the West have been doing in terms of satellites, in terms of technology, have not been things that are beneficial to the universe, in terms of the land and the people in general, in terms of even our own health, and when it comes to technology and the lack of oversight that comes along with all of those things. And so how are we thinking beyond chasing after the West? What does innovation and quote unquote progress mean to us when we're thinking about the future? Is it just following after the West, making sure we have satellites also, or is it also thinking of something more, something beyond, and even challenging the fact that all of these satellites are within outer space? Like, what are we doing here when we're thinking about chasing after this technological these quote unquote technological advancements? That's not to say that we don't need Africa and African countries to be positioned in a way that allows them to be able to be successful, but we have to think beyond just how we can match Europeans. It has to be more than that. It has to be what are we doing for Africa and African people that is going to create a different way, but also something that's better, that also challenges, that is not just like acquiescing to what the standard is currently. So I think that those are like, that's what I'm thinking of in terms of this particular story.
So bear with me. So yeah, but appreciate the take, Natasha. Appreciate you bringing up this story, Frank. We're going to transition again. We're doing the weekly roundup, and a lot of these stories too that we look at is on the continent of Africa, but we look at stories everywhere where African people are. But one of the things that we're very concerned about is the liberation of Africa, because we know if Africa is liberated, African people everywhere, will be empowered by African people being independent or interdependent and no longer dependent on the European powers or external forces, right? And they have complete control over their resources. So we want to be very conscious of what's going on in the continent and offer some input, in regards to what's happening, and hopes that, African people, as African people, we're making better decisions in the interest of African Black people. So another example is the story that I'm digging into in regards to what's happening with Zambia and Angola recently. They are in negotiation. No, well, the negotiation has been made, but they're going to develop a pipeline, an oil pipeline. And this is to transport oil from, or gas, kerosene, diesel from oil-rich Angola to Zambia. And this is, I'm very excited to see, anytime I see African nations beginning to integrate their economies or work with each other, it's always a plus, because Zambia is dependent on Asia right now for most of its oil. And so what happens in Asia when there's some sort of economic crisis, or just, the price of oil, what they have to pay for oil, is all dependent on what is happening in Asia with the Middle East. And if they want to up their price and charge more for the oil, they can. But now what Zambia is doing is saying, hey, we're going to build this pipeline so they're able to have access to oil at a cheaper price, right? And there's no longer this dependency on the Middle East and Asia. And so this is important. Zambia also, they have created or established created a pipeline with Tanzania. And they also had negotiated with Namibia to also create a pipeline from Zambia to Namibia. And so what we're seeing, this is a good trend to see African nations begin to, again, this interdependence on other African nations and no longer this dependency on outside forces. Because what's happening is Europe also is like looking to curb their dependency on oil. And change the economy, because of this, environment friendly policies that they're implementing. And so when that happens, what's going to happen to the African nations when they're dependent on oil, but now they have to go, now they're no one's no longer using oil. And so if they're not doing business with each other, what's going to happen is they're going to be buying fuel or alternative fuel solutions from these European nations and Asia. That's what's going to happen. So if we're creating an economy where we're interdependent, it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing, because they can have whatever they're using. They want to use rechargeable batteries, go right ahead. This is what we're doing in Africa. But the other point, I wanted to bring up with this story is the integration of these economies is really important in developing a Pan-African, state or supranational Pan-African structure. If we look at the history of Europe, and I only bring it up because at the end of the day, we're all people, all humans on this planet and dealing with the same issues. So a lot of the decisions that we make has a lot to do with the economy. And Europe's decision to integrate its economy when they created the European Coal and Steel Company back in 1951, that was the predecessor of what is now the European Union. But it was the integration of their economy and this need to create this sort of control or monopoly over these economic resources. And what they were doing, if you look at the decisions that they were making in Europe in regards to integrating their economy, it was to contend. If you look at the Pan-European, the principle or the philosophy behind creating the Pan-European Union, this is a real thing. I'm not making this up. When we talk about Pan-Europeanism, people like to say, like, there's no such thing. Like, there's an organization, an institution called Pan-European Union. And so when you look at the ideas behind it, it was so that they could be able to compete with America and to be able to compete with African and Asian nations economically in the future. They were looking towards the future. And so this is what Africa has to be very conscious of, is that Europe, America, they are competing with Africa and Asia. And so if we don't align ourselves, or if we don't come together and unify, and we're working as individual states, we're going to be vulnerable to whatever happens in Europe and whatever happens in Asia and other places. So, the last point, I know I said the last point is, as I was doing this research, I was looking at import and export and what's going on in Africa. And again, going back to this dependency and what we need to do. South Africa imports cocoa powder from Malaysia. South Africa imports cocoa powder from Malaysia, Indonesia, the Netherlands, Spain, and Singapore. When the Ivory Coast and Ghana is the biggest producers and exporters of cocoa, why are they importing from these countries? And then South Africa is exporting to Zambia, Namibia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Mauritius. So I hope I don't have to explain the contradiction there, and what we have to do as African people, we should be empowering and enriching other African nations. They should be importing, if they're going to import from Ghana, from the Ivory Coast, You know what I'm saying? And so now you have these African nations, Zambia, Namibia, they should be getting there. They don't have to go to South Africa. They should be getting it from Ghana and the Ivory Coast. But if they are, South Africa, but they're getting it from South Africa, and South Africa is getting it from non-African nations. So what we have to do is begin to empower and enrich each other and integrate our economies and buy from one another. So I know I said a lot, but there's a lot to talk about.
I can make a quick comment, and I guess I don't know if I should do my story after the fact or now.
No, you can still do your story. We can go a little over if y'all don't mind. So,
but just quickly, I think that like all the points you brought up, Akimba, are valid, and I guess I'm on a don't. Like, why are we following the West kick here? Because for me, I think the same thing, similar in terms of this pipeline. When we know about burning these types of oils, right? And this idea that, like, I'm just thinking about the land when we're doing these things, when we're creating these pipelines, what is happening just because of, us, the disasters that have happened around oil pipelines in Africa and other countries already. And I understand the importance of us being able to control our oil and definitely have an inter-Africa trade. So I definitely think like we need to be doing those things, but I think we also need to be thinking about what are some alternatives to these fuel sources, because we can't pretend like it's not an issue. We can't pretend like, okay, yeah, we should just be, now digging up and getting more gas. Like, what are we doing in terms of thinking of alternatives, right? Of other ways of getting energy and also not abusing energy. We understand that like there's a huge consumption of energy in the West, in America. And how do we shift away from that as opposed to start to follow that? Like, how do we do something that is really innovative? I think it's more innovative to think of things that are not already the things that are used and that are now that there's a push to move away from, as opposed to thinking of ways that are that don't already exist. And so that's my only challenge to us, just thinking like, okay, yeah, let's just build these pipelines, right, and use these as sources of energy. But let's think also beyond that. Like let's not think that we have to continue on this path toward building more and more pipelines, but also how can we use and create more renewable sources of energy that we can, as African countries and African people, work with each other to make sure we each are able to use them.
Yeah, let me just come in to contribute to that, but I want to respond to a comment here. But just to contribute to what you guys said, I think one of the main things that we are lacking of, we do not have intercontinental trade, among ourselves. If these things, if intercontinental trade among the African nations are going on, we will be educated on, what product is in certain part of, Africa, like in this nation, they have this product, in this nation, they have this product, and we will go for it. But because we are not doing that, we've been heavily dependent on outside nation. So we are only educated on what is coming from outside, but we are not educated what is within, even in Africa. Like, for example, most nations in Africa, if you ask them, they won't even tell you that, oh, cocoa comes from Ghana or Africa. They don't even know it because we are not being educated, or we are not doing intercontinental trade, and which is why that is very important. But I want to respond to a comment here, which is very, very good. Okay. Lydia said, and I want to really respond to her because there are things she said here which is not accurate. But I just want to educate her, on what is at stake here. According to her, she said, African do not like African American. I spent a lot of time in sub-Saharan Africa, volunteering, very good. I love that word, volunteering, very good. Volunteering, mostly in Uganda. They have very negative view of African American and American in general. I love that. He even included American. Now, Lydia, let me tell you this. Do you know the history of Africa? Sometimes you don't just generalize anything. And recently, I just want you to understand. Have you been following? how African in the diaspora have been moving on the African continent. And have you been following how they have been welcomed? There are not one country in Africa where Africans have left the diaspora and went to Africa and then they got negative reception or negative welcoming. They have various African organizations in the United States here, right? Check YouTube and you see them. They are mobilizing and organizing African in America or in a diaspora and taking them back to the African continent, doing tour with them and bringing them back. And most of them, they have gone and they are living there. Now, I'm glad you said voluntary. If you understand the history of Africa, those that left the diaspora and went to the African continent in the name of doing missionary job, now, that missionary job is what you call voluntary. When they go to Africa, they have a very different perception of African people because they feel that they are going there to go give help, and that they are so important. And I believe the reason why you encounter negative perception is because the kind of attitude you carry on there. If you are going there with the attitude of looking down on the people, if you are going there with the attitude of, oh, you have everything, in fact, they are poor, they are the needed, and you look at them certain way, trust me, they're going to give you a negative reception, a negative interaction. So I'm just trying to tell you that nobody hates African American and nobody hates American. If you go there, understand the history, what have been done on the African continent against African people. African people welcome European, and they took that as an advantage, okay? They took that as an advantage. They enslaved the people, and then in turn went there as missionary. In fact, it was because of missionary the people opened up to them, and they used that missionary job to look down the people, and they enslaved the people, and they colonized the people. Look at Christianity, what Christianity have done, and look at voluntary activities, what they have done on the African continent. All those people that went on the African continent to volunteer, they exploit the African continent, take millions or billions of dollars, and then they give the people little of nothing, and then they videotape them, come in the diaspora, put it on the internet, play for other people. And if you go down there with that kind of attitude that the people are poor, you go help them, they will give you negative perception. So I'm just letting you to know that do not do it. If you have been doing it, don't do it again. And I believe just from your comment, that is what you've been doing, and that's why you got negative reception. Thank you.
All right, peace. Thanks for raising that, because we have to counter any propaganda, any misinformation that's put out there, because there are a lot of people working to try to divide African people, with these generalizations. So we're going to continue, and this is what We Charge Colonialism is about. So Natasha, let's get into your story. We can discuss that, and then we'll go into our book reading. You're on mute.
I'm going to share my screen to show what my story is for today. So my story is basically around this call within South Africa for youth to study agriculture. And so I'm just going to play a little clip of it toward the end. So basically, the call is, as it says, for youth in South Africa to study agriculture because the needs of African people in terms of export, in terms of agriculture, are really being imported, as you were just discussing before, right? How a lot of the things are being imported in and so therefore there needs to be more youth who are going to be knowledgeable about agriculture, but also producing innovative agricultural ways that are going to sustain the people of South Africa. And so that's what he's talking about. But I want to play this clip which is part of the story, where the interviewer raises a question about once they do get this information and this education around agriculture, how are they going to be able to use it if the arable land is still a question? So let me just go ahead and play the video.
It also requires, Dr. Mutsecha, for us to look at the value chain, right? So we cannot have a conversation around agriculture without having a conversation to the access to land, and also with access to resources and funding. The very same young people that we are trying to encourage will turn around and say, once I've studied, is there commercial opportunity for me to even get access to the commercial land for farming? Am I able to get the funding that is necessary? How many loopholes do I have to go through in order for me to get access to that funding so that I'm able then to grow the specific farms and also utilize some modern technologies in terms of how is it that we can look after the land in which they are farming? How are we faring in being able to have those conversations of land and have that conversation to access to funding and resources to allow for that land to be tended to?
I have just been saying that, the coming national conference of the ANC has got to put the question of restitution and redistribution of land high on the agenda. Because at the moment, we say children must go for agriculture, but the arable land is in the hands of a minority, and this minority is the one that also has resources, it has access to the markets, so that even those of young people who are in agriculture, they cannot access arable land, they can't access the markets, they don't have the funding. So these are the matters that the ANC National Conference should address. And that applies to all.
So I'll just stop it right there. If you want to watch the whole video, definitely I encourage you to do so, because it gives you, a little bit more information. You can get the whole story. But also in particular, what, was also mentioned and raised when it comes to this particular issue of land and access to land is, one, the fact that when we're talking about nations, right, and when we're talking about Pan-Africanism and liberation and nation building, the key is land, right, and land back. And so even with all of the innovation that we do and however many children we educate in all different areas of society, if you don't have the land to build on, and also if you don't have the land to sustain yourself physically, right, in terms of being able to just get your basic needs, then you're always going to be dependent, and you're really not going to be able to build in the way that you need to, especially in ways that you're going to be able to align with and build with other nations. So I think that it's important for us to constantly, when we're talking about colonialism and decolonization, to continue to harp on this question of land and land back, especially in South Africa, where the small majority that he's talking about are white European people who still own over 70% of the land that exists in South Africa. Black people in South Africa, Africans, indigenous people there, they only control about 4% of the land. And so if you don't have land, you almost have nothing, and you also become super dependent on whatever group and whatever country controls it. And so we know that the British still have a heavy hand in controlling South Africa. Even in the video that he later on goes to mention GMOs and how there's GMOs in South Africa, and the fact that we know that GMOs have led to health issues. And he even later on the video goes to talk about how they even studied and saw that during the coronavirus epidemic, that those who were in the rural parts of South Africa that had access to natural and traditional foods fared better than those who didn't. And so the other question is, when we know that GMOs are outlawed in places in Europe, why are they not outlawed in South Africa? What is the government doing about allowing these things to come into the country that are detrimental to the health of the people? And we know that the health of the people, if you're not a healthy person, if you're not a person who can thrive, and you're always sick, you're not going to be able to build anything or fight against anything. And so it's really important that we here in America and other places of the African diaspora make it a real point to talk about and push for land back and support countries that want their land back, and make a way and figure out ways and innovate and innovate around that, innovate around how are we going to get our land back? Because that is key to nation building and is key to decolonization.
Yeah, definitely. Just, to add on, appreciate you bringing this story up. Because when we talk about land, like land is the source of life, Water is life. But, you have access to land, control of land, you have access and control of the water that comes with the land. But also the resources, to be able to build shelter, clothing, all of these things, the food, all of that, you have to have access. And whoever has control of those things, they, have control and power over you if you're dependent on them. So this is why the importance of land, getting the land back, has to be, it has to be a priority. It has to be the primary focus of African people, because this is what keeps us impoverished. When we talk about, you brought up colonialism and settler colonialism is about control over land. So whether, it's people settling or are they able to, indirectly control it through neo-colonialism, as long as they have control over that land, they control the people and they control all of the other resources that come with that land. Now, and so when we think about that, colonialism and self-colonialism, settler colonialism is inherently genocidal. And this, whether you go to any nation in the world, country in the world that doesn't have control over their land, you're going to see, in Africa in particular, African people, over a billion, like close to half the population of 1 billion people are living in poverty. And they're impoverished because they don't have control over the land. And so when the workers, and the interesting thing when it comes to the system that we're under, this colonial capitalist system, when workers begin to have, the more access workers have to resources, they become more conscious of the exploitation of the worker, and they develop this collective consciousness of their exploitation and oppression. And so this is why in a lot of the colonial capitalist countries, you see them adopt socialist policies. You go all throughout Europe, these countries that, Western Europe, these countries that was built on the backs of African people, begin to develop socialist policies in their nation, universal health care, all of these other things, right? You see it in Canada and in the United States, which is a mixed economy, even though it's still like the most exploited and oppressive of the European nations. They too adopt socialist policies because of the resistance of the African worker, understanding that they're being oppressed and exploited. But the problem is that the African workers are not going far enough to overturn colonial capitalism. But this is something that we have to be very conscious of. Just appreciate the story. I know we're about to transition, but yeah, land is the source of life. African people have to be not even just in control of the land, but we have to get back to understanding the science of it all, of agriculture. We have to be able to develop the land and everything like that. So we have to educate ourselves for independence. And that's going to take a revolutionary education. And so there's a lot to be said, even when we talk about the education piece that's connected to this, because what's keeping African people from securing the land and taking back the land from the colonizers is that the colonizers are influencing and dictating what it is that we should be learning as African people. And part of that education isn't overthrowing colonial capitalism. Part of that education is how to integrate ourselves into the system of colonial capitalism. How do we, how do we advance ourselves within this exploitative system? And so this is why we go through decades and decades trying to solve problems within the system that'll never be solved. I brought up the story last point. I brought up the story earlier in regards to Zambia and Angola developing this pipeline. When I was looking and researching the story, there was a story in 2012 about Zambia and Angola constructing a pipeline, coming together and constructing a pipeline. Here we are 10 years later, and they're still in the phase of doing research about the environment. And so the point I'm making there is that African people remain underdeveloped within this colonial system is because our unity is being stagnated by our relationship with the colonizer, where there's things that we can be doing right now, but we're not doing it because we don't have the sense of urgency, and because we still have this relationship with other nations, we're kind of content with continuing to do things the way that is being done right now, while societies are being built at the expense of billions of African lives. So, we just have to be very conscious of this and be very revolutionary in the choices and decisions that we're making. And this is speaking to all of those people in positions of leadership as well. I don't know, Frank, if you wanted to add something, go right ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, the colonizer, they always have their trick. And what Natasha just said, right? And what she said also in Kima, that is what exactly going on the African continent, and which of course I spoke about it yesterday, and I'll be speaking about it this coming Friday as well. So the colonizers always have that trick. Whenever they see that African people are getting that momentum of taking what belongs to them, right? They usually come out with an idea or policy that will try to slow African down. So when you look at it, even in South Africa, right? And that is why the last time I was listening to Julian Malema, which of course I usually follow him, what Ramaphosa have done, he had a meeting with England, right? And the resources to which, right, these so-called European colonizers have been exploiting from Africa, let's say the coal, right? And they have gotten billions or trillions of dollars. But when they have come to a point where Africans themselves are not taking their land back and taking their money back, then they came out to say, in order to control climate change, and that is one reason why they are pushing climate change, because they are saying to it that African people are not determined to take their resources back, okay, and to build Africa. So they are now pushing that climate change, lying to African people that they want to work on climate change to preserve the world or to preserve the climate, right? So they have come out with a law that they should stop the coal mining in South Africa. And Ramaphosa went and sat down there and listened to the British authority or the British government, right? And then that's why, how they call it, Julian Malema have been advocating and speaking about it, that how can you do that? Things that they have been exploiting from us. It have come a time where the South African are not taking on the land, are not taking on the mine, are not taking on everything, right? To mine their resources, to build their economy, to build their country, and for their citizens to benefit from it. And now you want to put stop to it. Now, the reason why they are doing all of these things, they want to put stop to it so that, because the British, how they call it, Parliament have also come out with a rule in the whole, how they call it, eastern part of the East African nation to stop the same money. So it's not just in South Africa alone. They have also done that in the whole eastern part of, how they call it, Africa. And they were discussing that in a, how they call it, the Pan-African Parliament, that is not going to happen. They're not going to listen to Great Britain, because Great Britain is not the one controlling Africa. Africans are the one controlling Africa, right? So they do these things so that Africa will depend on it again, because whatsoever they have stolen from us, right, they're going to now come back again and sell it to us after maybe 4, 5 years or 6 years or 1 decade. And then they come back again when it's getting finished from them. They come back again. Then it'll be like, oh, you know what? Now climate change is fine. And then we can come. And then they come up with another tactics to take back the money or to take back the land. That is what they are doing right now, because they are seeing that Africans are coming back and taking everything from them. So they are coming out with a policy to slow down African, to stop African. And then later they come back.
Hey, Ashe, most definitely. So, I know we're after. We can go like what, 15 after? We're good to go like 15 after. We're going to transition to the book. Everybody's good with that. Could you share your screen? I'm gonna read from.
So they are coming out.
You want me to share my screen?
To stop African. And then,
oh, what was that?
I don't know what that was.
Yeah. If you could share your screen.
Okay, yeah, I'll share my screen.
That's what that
page
was.
15.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me scroll down to page 15 before I share.
I think we have a comment here. It says something, or someone is playing. I don't know what. Someone is trying to donate, but I think it says it's not working. So
It might be. I don't know how this YouTube thing works. I don't know. I don't think we could take the donations at this time, though. I think because we transferred to, this is what I'm guessing, because we on a new channel.
Yeah.
And so that might be a thing. But you could definitely, anybody who want to support, go to the website. There's a place where you can donate on our website. We charge colonialism.org. Also, you could become a Patreon member and support We Charge Colonialism that way as well. And for those people who are Patreon members and members of WCC, we have this discussion. We're going through this book. We're going through the falsification of African consciousness. This is the book that we're reading now. We're on page 15. That's where I'm gonna start from. But we continue this discussion outside of We Charge Colonialism podcast. So for those people who want to be a part of that conversation, make sure you become a Patreon member. And support us that way. All right. So we ready?
Yeah. We just got to get the screen. I'm sharing, so it just got to be brought up. I don't
Okay.
know what's next, but yeah.
It might be a little slow on my end, but I'm going to,
Here
read.
it's up.
All right. All right. So from page 15, history and psychology. History is projected in this culture as being irrelevant. I don't think by accident. Again, if it is made to look irrelevant, it is made to look unprofitable. Then making it appear so must serve some profitable purpose. When courses in college or university are apparently presented non-politically, objectively, neutrally, they are actually presented in the most political way. We must understand that it is in the nature of this racist culture to hide its political agenda. Therefore, it presents so-called facts and information as if they have no political connections or implications. I often try to show how making something political creates knowledge and information that can be of great value. I often use the concept of the Skinner rat to show how that concept is presented non-politically in the psychology of learning, how the rat is put in a box and can only eat if it performs a particular behavior. So if it pushes a lever, it is only as a result of pushing that lever that it is allowed to eat. The experimenter determines when this rat is going to eat, when it is going to drink. He determines the living conditions under which this rat must survive. The rat becomes conditioned and changes as a result of the fact that the man has control of vital things in its life. Thus, we can present this paradigm in a very sterile way in terms of learning and reinforcement principles. We can write a whole book about them with graphs, arcane language, and the whole bit. I often point out how a Black student can learn Skinnering psychology better than a white student, and still, as a result of having learned it, be made dumb by it, because it is taught on a race-neutral, non-political level. But I often ask my students whether there is only one way of looking at this situation. Why not look at it politically? This rat is conditioned. That is, it reflects the conditions under which it is forced to survive as the result of a set of power relations. So why not analyze this experiment in terms of power relations? Based on these terms, we may reach the conclusion that the conditioned rat is socially created. Its personality is a social creation. What it learns is the result of a power differential between the rat and the experimenter, because the experimenter has power over the rat and uses that power to transform and create something new in the rat. As a result of the conditioning experiment, the rat is different from other unconditioned rats. It shows the effects of its conditioning. The experimenter is able to do this because the experimenter has control over the rat's circumstances. If we will go further and identify with the rat, we then begin to learn something about ourselves, something of value. We will then have grasped something that can lay the foundation for revolution and change, not as a sterile bit of knowledge and information that we can't use. I often ask my students, who has control of your food? Who has control of your electricity? Who has control of your water or your jobs? Who tells you what to wear when you go to work? Who tells you when to come to work, when to leave, when to go to lunch, how to speak, how to write, how to do this, how to do that, and how are these things taught and how they are conditioned? It is by reward and punishment. You do this, you get paid. You don't do this, you don't get paid. You get a raise, you get docked. What do we have here? We see the same basic situation and the same basic principles for conditioning rats are now transferred to life and reality itself. Therefore, to live in the ghetto under the power of another people is to be created by that people. To be rewarded or punished by that people is to be created by that people. What would happen if these ghettos we live in today are surrounded by a force that blocks the food and the water, cuts off the electricity and the other things? What kind of situation will we be in? But even with the water coming in, the food coming in, we are still created and conditioned by the circumstances under which we live. We are living under them as the result of the exercise of the power of another people over us. Therefore, if we wish to change this situation, that is, the conditions under which we live, then we must change the power relationships. If we are to prevent ourselves from being created by another people and are to engage in the act of self-creation, then we must change the power relations. All right, I know I read a lot right there, just trying to catch up. But I mean, for real, that was a drop the mic. What else is to be said after that? But Dr. Wilson, here I think like really gets to it in regards to how things are particularly like education. Just speaking to the education piece, but I think we can look at all different aspects though of society and make the same argument, how things are presented politically or non-politically, and even the presenting of something as being non-political is a political decision made by those people in power. To give you this education as if there's no agenda or objective behind you learning something in particular, or how you learn that, and also how you apply that information. So I think this is important. I just want to use myself as an example. When I went back to college, when I initially went to college, I didn't go there for a political reason. I went there to, get an education and to get a job because this is what society taught me. Get an education and you'll put yourself in a position, get a degree, put yourself in a position to make a lot of money in society. When I left college and then I went back, and this is after years of study, African-centered study, I went there I went back to college with an African-centered mindset or framework in regards to how I'm thinking and how I'm going to do things. So now when I was sitting in the seats at the college, I was there with an agenda, a political agenda. So whatever I was learning, I'm thinking, how can I apply this to empower myself and my people? And I think like the way that we look at the information is influenced by our Eurocentric education or our African-centered education. And so an African-centered person, and I'll leave it here, looking at the Skinner rat, he makes a good point. Like, who are we in this experiment? Are we the person in a position of power that's able to influence the rat? Or are we the rat in this situation, in this society, being influenced by people in positions of power who can make decisions on when we eat, what we have to do to eat and survive? And so, I just wanted to uplift that because, that's an important point that he made. But if y'all had any thoughts on any of this, y'all can chime
in. One thing that really stuck out to me was that one of those last sentences when he says, if we are to prevent ourselves from being created by another people. So this idea of, and, are to engage in the act of self-creation. This idea of someone else creating you, right? I'm applying that not only to creating you psychologically, in which a Eurocentric education does, but also in terms of creating you biologically, because the recreation and also the creation of your culture, right? So who is creating you in all those different kinds of ways, and how this false objective, non-biased, quote unquote education that we're said to be given is creating us, right? And that's another people creating us, because when we go through school, we just think that the education we're getting is non-biased, right? We just think it's neutral. And then eventually, if you happen to be able to get the type of political education that is necessary, you then are able to see, oh, this education that I received is not neutral. But so many of us, even after getting out of school, even as adults, don't realize that the education is still not neutral. The education that you're sending your kids to school to get is not neutral, because even the basic question we should be asking ourselves, as adults who may have children, or, who are going through the school system, or who have gone through the school system, is, if it's so neutral, why is it so Eurocentric? If it's neutral, why is it that they're presenting Europeans as the people and the best? If it's so neutral, clearly that shows a bias. So then we should be always arguing against the fact that this education is not neutral, and understanding the fact that education is not a neutral thing, just like everything else is not. Just like dating is not neutral when we're talking about who is creating us, what we should look like, who we should marry. Right? How do you recreate yourself, and who you should be recreating yourself with? Goes into, it also connects with this idea of the type of education that you're getting, in this sense of the way that you see who you are, right? The way that you see who other people are. If you think Europeans are the best, you're going to be like, okay, well, I need to, to recreate myself, I need to recreate something better. When we think about, our hair or our skin, if you are taught that through education, through this Eurocentric education, that your hair is not the best, your skin is not the best, then when you go to the process of, okay, I'm going to create life, right? I'm going to recreate what's my recreation of myself is going to be better. So they should be lighter. They should have less coarse hair, right? So even all of that goes into this idea of who is creating you. Are you creating yourself? Are you operating in an act of self-creation, or are you operating through an act of someone else creating you? And how the conditions, like he was talking about the Skinner rat, even make sure that you live in a state of poverty where you think that in order for you to be able to get better or do better, that you have to then look outside of yourself. Look outside of yourself for that better. Why, if we look at, countries that have still colonized, even if we're talking about, let's take Africa, for example, where you have white older people, older women and older men who can go in there at 70 or 50 and marry some 20-year-old African person, because of the conditions in which they are in, and how they feel that they can get out of those conditions, where they feel the power lies, not within themselves, or within themselves recreating with those who are on the continent, but within creating with those who are not them, right? Those colonizers who have that power, who are the ones controlling the Skinner rat. So I think that this idea of self-creation is so important that he brings up, and for us to dig into that in all areas of life.
Hey, indeed, Frey. What?
Yeah, I mean,
you letting it marinate?
Yeah, man, Natasha, she blew it up. And let me just add to that, right? In adding to this, how they call it, skinny rag experimentation, which of course I think he mentioned that he said ratification. In adding to that, right, to the extent that this experiment, especially, I'm sorry to say this, but it refers to African people, it refers to Black people, to be specific, especially, right? Like when we put that perspective into even this whole how to call it, religion aspect, that when mostly even on the African continent, or even among diasporan how to call it, African, when you are speaking to them in relation to this whole Christianity, that how to call it, Jesus or God is now white, right? And you want to say God or Jesus was Black, it is the same black man, not even the white man. The black man will come and tell you it doesn't matter the color, who the color of God is or who the color of Jesus is. But if it does not matter, if it wasn't, then why they changed it to white? It matters. There's a reason why they changed it to white, because it put whiteness in a position to control the black man's mind. It put the white man in a position of becoming more superior than the black man. It put the black man in a position of being inferior. And that is why it is important to them. And when you're discussing it and trying to make black people to understand, it is in fact the black man that will come to you and says to you, it is not important. All we know, God exists. No, it is important, because if the white man wasn't going to change there to white and leave it black, it was going to put the black man in a perspective of being more superior, and why the white man was going to be inferior. So it is important we discuss it. In a scenario that Wilson talked about the wrath, it refers exactly to black people, and that is why we are still in the condition. And I think even when you read further, he also said that, and when it comes to a point where the white man have to feed, his or her child before the black child, he will prefer feeding the white child before the black child. Okay, because we have been conditioned, and this is where he's saying. And I will just end by saying, there's one guy, a quote I got from Derek Muhammad. He said, black people in America, but I'm going to say black people in general, right? They are like, and he said, they are like 7-foot men drowning in a river of 7 feet. How can that be? How can this man be free? How can a 7-foot tall man get drowned into a 4 feet river? Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense. And how can a 7-foot tall man be drowning in a river with 4 feet, asking for help, asking for rescue, asking for somebody to swim to come and free him or her? All he need to do is to just wake up, stand up. And once he stand up, the water will hold him below his knee, and he will walk and go. So this is the state of black people, because we are still asleep and we still rely on the interpretation of the colonizer of white people. We rely on the kind of history they bring to us, and that is black people.
Hey, appreciate all these comments, man. Y'all really got me just thinking, because y'all raising so many points, and this is what Dr. Emerson Wilson does too. He gets us to like really analyze this situation under a Eurocentric, I'm gonna say philosophy or framework that has really been like, we have been inundated with that type of thinking. And so, and it goes to this title, the falsification of African consciousness, and he's breaking that down. It's a different way of thinking that we have to adopt to be able to transform our conditions. The last point, I think we can make some last points rather than go into another paragraph. Is European historiography. He talks about European historiography and oppression exposed. And in this text in the beginning, he talks about how European historiography is used. If I go to now, let's look at, this is on page 14. He said, now let's look at European history and what I call historiography and oppression, its functions and outcome. By historiography, I refer to the writings of history, and that's historiography. Historiography is, is two ways to define it, but one of those definitions is a history of histories. And so you're looking at the writing of histories in different subjects. And so if we're looking at the history of the transatlantic slave trade, for an example, the historiography of the transatlantic slave trade will be all of those histories that are written on the transatlantic slave trade. And so the problem is that we have been studying and relying on the historiography, the histories that have been written by Europeans on these different topics, and understanding that there's their experience, their politics is going to influence how these stories are told. I'm gonna, just make this last point in regards to just like understanding that and the importance and how different it would be. I think Natasha, you had made a point. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it made me think in regards to when we're looking at the history of the world. It centers, when you're in these schools, it centers around what's happening in Afro-Eurasia. So what's going on in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And then when they talk about Africa, it's only situated in Egypt. They only talk about Egypt. And that's because of the Nile Valley civilization. But when the history begins to develop, world history, and you're studying it, Egypt becomes less talked about. They'll talk about the dynasties, but they don't even go in detail about those dynasties. There's really more of a focus in what's happening in what is considered Mesopotamia, but in that area, which is like Iran and Iraq, Anatolia, like Turkey today, Europe, and what was happening in China. And if you look at those people who are practicing or exercising power today, it is those groups of people today. And so they're telling their story. Now, just imagine, let's just say Angola, for instance. If Angola was a superpower, if Angola was telling their story and they had influence and power over all other peoples, what would happen is that the history of the people of Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly Angola, will be told because of the relationship that the Angola people and their history and experiences as it pertains to other African people in that region is going to be told, because that's going to be more of a focus. Their story is going to be central, and everybody that's connected to them, stories will be told as well. And so as the history develops, Europe and all of these other nations, their stories will be told as it pertains to their relationship with the people in Angola. And so what would be more important or the importance of Europe history will be its contact in regards to the transatlantic slave trade, but that will come later. And so I think it's very important understanding that, the Europeans, the reason why they're centered, and we all know this, is because of the position that they have within the society. But once we begin to take an African-centered approach, we center ourselves and we begin to tell stories, and then we can develop solutions based off of our own experiences. But if y'all had any, last thoughts, I just wanted to get that out.
I'll just put in a quick last thought. One of the things, a quote I was listening to Dr. Kamal Rashid that he was talking about is intellectual maroonage. And so this idea of thinking outside of European philosophy and paradigms, but also how your way of thinking what freedom looks like and the actions that you would take are connected to the language in which that you're able to use. So that when we're, part of the argument is that, like, through English, right, it's connected to European ideas, and through those ideas also where it's framing how we think of freedom. And so it's important for us to do this intellectual maroonage, even to the point when we're talking about like what Amos Wilson is doing, right, thinking outside of what's been presented to us in terms of European ways of thinking, but also starting that it's important that we start to also think about how language shapes ideas and ways of seeing the world. Like a language shows a way of knowing. And so outside of knowing other languages, that there's something missing there. So I think, I don't know, that's just my 2 cents that I wanted to add, my last final words.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think like Nikuma was saying about Ethiopia, mostly when they're talking something about Africa, they deeply or mostly only focus on Ethiopia. And again, and that is why a study like this and reading books like this is very paramount to our solution as African people. The reason why mostly, or one of the reasons why mostly they focus on Egypt is because, again, We can link that to Christianity, because when you take the way in which the colonizer rewrote the African story and put their picture there, bear in mind, they have already made Egypt as a white nation. Okay, they made Egypt as a white nation. So and if they make Egypt as a black nation, that will contradict their story as Egypt being a Christian land. It will contradict their story. So in writing a story about Egypt, when it comes to Christianity, they have to give the narrative so that it will fit to them, because they have made Egypt a white land. But if you really go deep down into history, into African history, you come to find out that there were great places more than Egypt. Of course, we know the how they call it in Mali. Before Mali, we call it Timbuktu. Timbuktu, well, if you really got into it, Timbuktu was even more than Egypt. If you want to put Christianity, how they call it, aside. If you go to the Sahel Empire, okay, if you go to the Sahel Empire like Angola, if you go to Zimbabwe, those were great places in Africa where you have African history, where you have African, how they call it, what do I want to say? African doctrine, where you have them there, where you have African scientists. It was not just in Egypt. When we talk about the African, the continent of Africa, the doctrine of Africa was not just based in Egypt alone. No, we have great philosophers, we have great scientists. That's why when the Greek left from Rome or their homes, they went to the entire African continent. They did not stop in Egypt. In fact, most of them did not get their knowledge from Egypt. They went as far as Timbuktu. They went as far as the Sahel Empire. They went as far as Zimbabwe, all those places. They were great places. They went and the land, they got wisdom. It was not just Egypt. But the reason why they stopped in Egypt is because of that same Christianity, and they tried to make Egypt a white land. And that's why they, at some point of time, they came out of Queen Nefertiti. They said she was a white woman. Imagine. So if they can even do that, that's just to tell you that the history of white people is lie. If they can even make Queen Nefertiti a white woman, that tells you again, Jesus Christ was not a white man.
Hey, say it again. Yo, I feel empowered now. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go outside on with this information. I want to appreciate everyone for tuning in to another podcast, Book Club. We Charge Colonialism. Make sure you share this, though. Don't be stingy with the knowledge. Don't be stingy with the knowledge. You know, each one teach one. We're back here next week at 10 a.m. Make sure you visit our website, check out our articles as well. And also, we're developing the Black Power Fund for those people who are doing any work in agriculture or farming or gardening. Look out for the Black Power Fund. This would be a way that you can receive some resources to be able to continue their work. Last thing I want to say is big up to the freeing and liberation of Dr. Mutulu Shakur. In case you don't know, Dr. Mutulu Shakur is coming home. He's coming home, right? He's not home yet. I know there's a process for that. So big up to that, you know, free Mutulu. Mutulu is free, but free them all. And Mumia Abu Jamal, he is going to be coming home next, but you know, the work isn't done. We still have to do the work to bring him home. And so in Philadelphia, this December, we're organizing. I'm going to be rallying behind Mumia and trying to get him home as soon as possible. So make sure, I don't care where you are, make sure that you spread the word about Mumia Abu Jamal, his work, and do whatever it is that's necessary, whatever it is that you can do to help us bring our comrade freedom fighter home. So with that being said, appreciate you all. Until next time, peace.
Peace.